Wonderful. We are back. We're about in a chronologically about. Let's go to 1971. Had France happened yet?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
So I had mentioned that a young guy named Laurent Westman had asked to translate Indian Sugar Plum and Line. Morning, the morning play of Morning, Noon, and Night. And I said yes. And so he did. And in parallel, I had met Beckett and was very anxious to get back to France and spend more time with Beckett. A production was set up at the Théâtre de la Gaîté Montparnasse. It was run by a guy named Michel Fagado. And he was going to direct, Michel would direct Indian and Sugar Plum. And as a kind of crumb, he let this kid, Laurent Westman, direct the morning play at midnight, chiaroscuro. So Indian Wants the Bronx was still running in New York. They came back from Spoleto and they continued to perform.
Same theater?
I think so, yeah. And anyway, I see Pacino doing the play. I get on a plane, I go to Paris, and I see a very, very famous actor named Laurent Terzieff, really beloved actor in France, but way too old to be playing the Pacino role in India. But he's good. And there was an old movie star named Marcel Dalio playing the Indian. He's a white guy with a handkerchief on his head. He's just saying anything that comes into his head. We have no Indians in France, who's going to know? And so it's like a little off-putting. But I'm looking at Terzieff, I'm thinking, boy, these French actors are not bad. So I go and I get something to eat and I walk around Paris and I come back to the theater at midnight to see the morning play, Morning, Noon, and Night, which was called in French Clair Obscur, because it's about a black family taking a pill to turn white, and they're white for one day, so it's chiaroscuro. And the play starts, and there's a kid on stage, and he is a French Al Pacino. He's that good, and I was just stunned. And I watched the show, and I don't know any of these people, and he's Pacino. And I go up afterwards and I introduce myself, and it's Gérard Depardieu. It's his first play ever. Is that amazing?
Wow. Yeah.
So some years later, I'm with my wife and Jillian, we're crossing Lower Broadway, and I see Gérard, and now he's a great big fat guy. And I say to Jillian, that's Gérard Depardieu, and she said, no. And I said, no, that's him, that's really him. And she said, well, say hello. And I said, no, he'll never remember me. And she said, come on, say hello. And he was doing a movie called Green Card at that time.
Yes, yeah.
And so he looks at me, and I look at him, and I say, Gérard? He said, oui. I say, je suis Horovitz. He goes, no, c'est pas vrai. And he picks me up, like, he's enormous. He picks me on my feet like I'm a toy. Lovely. Anyway, yes. So we're back there in '71, and Line gets translated by somebody Beckett knows, called Claude Roy, R-O-Y, who's a very famous journalist at that point for Nouvelle Obs, and also a poet, married to an actress named Loli Bellon, who ultimately became a playwright and a very important one in France. And Claude Roy walked into Paris arm in arm with de Gaulle and Hemingway on Liberation Day. He's an old communist guy. Wonderful, wonderful human. He does a translation of Line, and he gives the play to Ionesco, who lives across the street from the theater. And says, tell me what you think. And Ionesco says, I want to meet this guy. And Ionesco very much wanted me to marry his daughter. That was really what was going on. And he wrote the introduction to Line at Théâtre Poche Montparnasse, and that production ran for 11 years, nonstop. And it's a good story because there was a terrible critic in Paris who he was very old. His name was Jean-Jacques Gaultier. And he had reviewed Waiting for Godot and said that Beckett should be stopped, that the play was rubbish, and that nobody should be fooled. So now, and then he had reviewed Ionesco and said the same about Ionesco. So now, all these years later, he comes back to review Le Premier, the first, by Horovitz, and he knows that Horovitz is close with Beckett, and Ionesco has written the introduction to the play. So we're in a theater with 100 seats. The play is over, and this guy stands up at the end and yells, bravo, bravo, bravo. He's not going to be fooled again. He's not going to be publicly shamed again. And the whole audience evidently, says, oh my God, Gaultier is standing. They all stand up and they're cheering. I went to see 4 Marx Brothers movies with Claude Roy because Claude Roy knew me by reputation and was afraid to have me in the theater at the same time the critics were there. He thought I would not be safe. And so we came back to the theater, and Michel Fagueneau, who co-directed the play with me, was waiting outside of the theater. And we said, well, he said, c'est un triomphe. And it ran for 11 years. And it was with Claude's wife and really wonderful French actors. Oh my God, they were lovely. So it certainly didn't make me rich, but it gave me enough money to go back and forth to Paris at will. And really, I wanted to be close with Beckett. It was that important to me. Certainly more important to me than it was to him. And so there's this thing in life: if you love me, I love you. If I love you, you love me. And I just felt that way about France. I fell in love with France, and they started to just give it back to me. And I started to have play after play translated and performed there, and my plays would be in some little theater in New York, or it would be in a big theater in Paris. Or it would have a 2-week run in New York, or it would have a 2-year run in Paris. And it just kept going that way. And then I started to even do plays there in French before I do them here in English, because I didn't have to wait. Mm-hmm. And I think, for me, maybe it's just my personality, but Broadway never interested me because I never wanted to wait until, to wait to a point where you can't remember why you wrote the play. Mm-hmm. It's just ridiculous. And then you work on it like an artifact that you've discovered, like somebody else could have written it. You don't have that same kind of insane connection that you have when you write the thing. You're alone in a room and you just want it to burst out of there with you. And I think I did that interview with a Wall Street Journal guy, and I think I said it to him, but in some form, that I think the happiest time of my life was when I was writing a play a week and the actors would be waiting for the pages. It would be so, it was such a collaboration, and we'd just, an actor would say, no, and we'd try this and try that, and we were really playmakers, theater makers or whatever. I love film. I really love film, but it's the same thing. You write a film, and 7 years later, the film gets made, and it's just, that's why now if I make another film, I'll only do a film that's based on a play of mine. It's to make a record of my work. It's more than it's not. I just grew up in Gloucester with no internet or no working television. There was a problem. And the DVD player was working through the TV, and we watched 4 Truffaut films. And I sat there feeling guilty, and I thought, how can you make movies when this guy existed? He's just great. These are great films, and they're so simple and beautiful and moving, and he says things about life. 52 years old when he died, Truffaut. 52.
52.
He had planned to make 30. He had a goal to make 30 films. He made 20 films. He died. He had a brain tumor.
Wow.
He never knew who his father was.
Huh.
Never. All. They're very personal, those films of his. Beautiful work. Anyway. So line brought me back and forth to Paris, and then this kind of flood of plays. I don't know if you remember, backing up in time, I suppose in the early 70s, there was the Boys in the Band was touring America. It was like the 3rd company of Boys in the Band, and I knew a guy an actor from the O'Neill named Bobby Christian, who was in my life the first AIDS death, and he was a very wonderful
Bobby
actor.
Christian.
Did the Bougart's Blood Knot.
I did not know him real well. I believe he was working on a TV show that I was observing on. Yes, when he died.
But he was a very close friend of Jimmy Hammerstein's, and Jimmy's wife, and they had done a lot of work together. I saw him on the street, and I knew he was supposed to be out on tour. And I said, "What are you doing here?" And he said, "We closed out of town." I said, "Boston." He said, "Boston." And
they closed
the tour.
The tour.
Terrible reviews.
Right.
It must have been the third national tour or something like that. And Elliot Norton hated it, and Kevin Kelly hated it. They killed it, and it closed. And it's just typical of what was going on up there then. Although anyway, so Bobby said to me, I said, "Oh, I love it up there. I'm from there." And we started to talk, and I talked about. I said, when I was a little kid, the happiest memories I had from my childhood was my parents used to go to Gloucester on special days. They'd take my sister and me to Gloucester to the beach, and they had a friend, had a house in Rockport. The guy who had a jewelry store in Wakefield belonged to the temple with my parents or something.
How far was Gloucester from Wakefield?
26 miles, marathon distance. Anyway, he said, well, we have this house in Gloucester, that's where we were living, and it's all paid for until October. And you can use it, I give you the key. So I went up with my second wife, who died quite young, and Adam, the Beastie Boy, was a baby in diapers then. And we stayed in this house, and as soon as I went to Gloucester, I realized 2 things. That I was frightened to leave New York, because I thought if I leave New York, they'll never remember me. Yeah. And this career is a fiction, and it will just disappear, and I'll have to go back to my room. And the other thing was how much I loved Gloucester. And I thought the first thing is ridiculous, and the second thing is real. So I started renting houses up there, and then I bought this little house that I'm still in now for, I think, $28,000 when I bought it. And I mean, it was a big thing for me to have a house in Gloucester when I'm living in New York. And so I had to buy something that was really cheap, because for all I knew at that moment, it could just fall down without me ever getting there. And it's a teeny little Victorian house, but it's got an acre of land around it. It's not far from the beach. And it was covered with asbestos shingling, so I had to invest money, and and get the asbestos off the house, and it's beautiful. Anyway, and then I thought, well, if I'm going to be in this town at all, there's got to be a theater. There's no theater in the town. Funnily enough, Thornton Wilder, there was a theater there way back in the day, and Thornton Wilder had played the stage manager in our town in that theater in Gloucester, really down the street from that. So there was a tavern downtown called the Blackburn Tavern, and they had a room, a kind of rock and roll concert room. And I met the guy who owned it, and I said, what about doing plays in there? And he had worked with David Wheeler at some point as a carpenter.
Uh-huh.
And he said, great. And so I went to the local paper, this enterprising thing, and I said, I put a piece in the paper. I said, I'm going to start a theater. And there's a meeting in this room on such and such a day and such a time, and 50 people showed up. And nobody had any kind of experience. So I said, what do you do? The guy said, I'm a carpenter. I said, okay, you're going to design and build the scenery. What do you do? I'm an electrician. You're going to hang the lights. What do you do? Well, I can remember the first play we did was a play of mine called The Former One-on-One Basketball Champion, with a little kid and a washed-up pro. They play basketball on stage, and Adam was the little kid. He was 12. And we were rehearsing, and I said to Heidi, who's still doing publicity for Gloucester Stage, I said, oh my God, do we have an audience? Is anybody coming? Because it was getting time to open. We opened the door, and there was a line down the street and around the corner.
Oh.
And it's always worked. And we stayed in that tavern for quite some years, and then they wanted us out, or some outrageous rent that would have bankrupted the theater. And I went to Gorton's, or somebody from Gorton's came to me and said, we've got this disused warehouse on the harbor, and you can use the upstairs. And I can remember cleaning it. Oh, I love this story. There was, Reverend Moon moved to Gloucester and built a church, a Unification Church in Gloucester. And there was this place of, Portuguese and Finns and a whole immigrant history. Suddenly there are Koreans, and everybody goes crazy. They have T-shirts that say, Save Gloucester, Shoot a Mooney. It was horrible. So I write a play called Henry Lumper, and I call the Moonies the Lilies. And it's all about a war on the waterfront and protecting the lilies. And the point is that it's just another generation of immigrants come to Gloucester to fish back up. And I put the play on. Somebody dumps a bushel basket full of fish heads on my lawn. I mean, it's ridiculous. Anyway, the play really makes an impact on the community.
Mm-hmm.
We've got this building, and I remember the guy, this director, Ray Johnson, he's working for New York City Ballet now. The two of us are trying to clean this building. There are rats the size of dogs in the building because it's right on the water. And he's a grown man, he starts crying. I said, what is it? He said, it's too big, we can't do this, Israel, it's too big. There are big wooden doors, and there's a knock on the door. We hear this, somebody's in the door. We open this big door, and there are 30 Korean kids, and they're all Moonies. And I go, yeah. And he said, kid says, we're the Lilies, we've come to help you clean them. And they clean the place, and we paint the place.
Wow.
Puts a lump in my throat now. Then we shortly.
What year did you start?
I think we opened in. I think we opened in '79. I have to Google it. We're 36 years now. This is the 36th season, and there was a terrible drug problem in Gloucester that the American government changed the fishing. Changed the game for fishermen, and they cut the limits back on what American fishermen could take out of the water. At the same time, the Canadian fishermen had triple limits, and the Japanese were doing this strip fishing with big nets. So the Gloucester fleet, there had been 45 trawlers, I guess, important fishing boats in Gloucester Harbor. One by one, they began to mysteriously sink. Insurance went up to $1 million a year for a fishing boat. And it was called pulling the plug. Just sink your boat, get the insurance money, get re-educated by the government, get the hell out of the fishing boat. So the drug lords in Boston just saw this great opportunity to run drugs through Gloucester and use these guys who were trying to eke out a living as fishermen to run drugs through the city. I mean, sometimes in the bodies, the drugs would be in the bodies of fish, and I mean, it was a big international whatever. I was researching a play called North Shore Fish about women fish packers. I was already very caught up in the community, and remember, my father had been a truck driver, and I was suddenly in an America in which working class life wasn't respectable. If your daughter was going to marry a plumber, that was a shame. If your son was going to be a carpenter, that was a shame. It just, you had to be an engineer or a doctor or whatever. And so I was in this town in this changing time, and so I wanted to write about these women fish packers. So I created a play about women fish packers, and these women had been packing fish for, say, 4 generations. And the play is set on the day that they're told the plant is closing, pack up your stuff and go home. It's going to be a fitness center. So it's a perfect metaphor for changing America. So a woman fish packer, through my friend Mick Verga, who was a local fisherman, he puts me in touch with a woman named Gail Randazza, who's a local fish packer, and she's taking me to fish packing plants. But all the time we're in the car, she's talking about the drug problem in Gloucester. I know nothing about it. And I finally, she tells me everything I've told you, and then some, and I say, how do you know this? And she said, we have a junkie in the family. So I read this play about the drug problem in Gloucester called Henry Lumper that involved the Moonies and the Lilies and all that I told you. And the mayor says that he learns about the problem, the drug problem, from seeing my play. It's like Shakespeare, And so the local paper breaks the story. The fish heads go between the lilies and breaking the story of the drug, and supporting the Moonies, not Reverend Moon for Reverend Moon, but just the Moonies as people, and being against the racism. I mean, I grew up a Jew in a town with 6 Jewish families. I had the shit kicked out of me as a kid because I was told that I killed Christ. I said that was 2,000 years ago, and the kids from St. Joe's School said, yeah, but we just heard about it. So the local paper runs the story. It makes the Boston Globe. It makes the front page of the New York Times. And it's revealed that Gloucester has the single largest per capita drug problem in the United States of America. I say publicly, you can't solve a problem unless you admit you've got it. Admit you got it, and then we can work on it. So it was amazing. It was amazing. But it was the birth of a theater, because it really And for me, it got me so involved in the community and the idea of writing plays that were set there. And it really just pulled me out of New York for a long period of time. I've probably written 12 or 15 plays that are set in Gloucester that are essentially about working class life. And then there are these crazy accidents, like Park Your Car in Harvard Yard is a play about the toughest teacher in Gloucester High School and a woman he flunks who comes to look after him at the end of his life, and he doesn't remember her. And Jason Robards and Judith Ivey end up doing it on Broadway. Judith gets nominated for the. But was that my plan? I wrote the play. It was the furthest thing from my mind. It just, I wanted to write about teachers whose standards are too high for kids in these little towns. That somebody's got to embrace what's there. And so it really changed my life. It gave me something very special. And Park Your Car in Harvard Yard is done all over the world. God knows how many languages, because every country knows what it is. Everybody knows what it is to have a teacher whose standards is too tough. Can't keep up. It's not, you're not from privilege. You don't know what the hell he's talking about. And anyway. So, yes.
You had in there the primary English class that's circle in the square, downtown.
Oh, downtown, yeah, Diane Keaton. That would get us to about 1974, 75, something like that.
Yeah, and that was Jill Claiborne as well, or not?
No.
Okay.
We did it. Jill Eikenberry. I tried it out. I wanted to write a comedy. I'd written so many. Oh no. A group of us from the O'Neill were forced to present the prize to Neil Simon, who to me was the enemy. He's a perfectly nice human being, but it was like everything represented everything I didn't want the theater to be. And I can't remember whether we thought we were winning a prize or we got there and it was like pulled on us or something like that. Somehow, Terrence McNally and I decide that we're going to write a Neil Simon play. We'll write a Neil Simon play. We can write. So Terrence, of course, writes the Ritz, that's the gay bathhouse, and I write the primary English class that's about, people from all over the world with no common language and a teacher who's completely inept trying to teach English. And these are plays Neil Simon would have written in 1,000 lifetimes. And so Diane did the play, and it was around the time that Annie Hall came out, so you couldn't beat the audience away with it. She was wonderful. And then she left, and Jill Eikenberry was a lovely actress, replaced her, and after 1 week they closed the show, the producers. And the guy had been David Merrick's Jack Schlissel. They all have funny names, Schlissel and Kipnis, and they closed the show, and I was just devastated. And I said, why would you do it? The guy said, we made 340% to return to the investors. Why the fuck would I keep this thing going and lose the money back? And I just thought, you sleep with dogs, you wake with fleas. It's that simple, And Diane went off to be Diane, but she was lovely.
And The Widow's Blind Date?
Well, that was yeah. That's probably my most popular play in Europe, and not so well known here. It's a play about a woman who's gang raped in high school, and comes back to the little town set in Massachusetts, and confronts two of the guys of the 11 kids who gang raped her at the senior class beach party. And her plan is to forgive them, and it almost all happens again, and she gets one of them to kill the other one. It's a very, very grim, I think it's a good play. But When I was at my year at Salem Teachers College, I was quite a good runner in my lifetime, and I throughout my life, and I ran on a track team for this school for Salem with a guy, I won't mention his name, who was a very close friend of mine from a very upstanding Catholic family on the North Shore. He was a great guy. And we used to go to a beach in Marble Lynn or Marblehead, because you could meet girls. It was like a hangout for kids. And so I'm a freshman in college, so what am I? And I was very young when I got out of high school, so. And we're there, and it's the morning, and we're talking about something, and all of a sudden, this guy goes, "There she is. It's her." And I look, and I see this girl who's maybe 17, and I've never seen anything like it before or after. I've never seen anybody in that much pain. And this kid, my friend, blurts out this story that he's one of a dozen boys who gang raped this girl on the beach the night before. And she's still there, and there she is. And he starts toward her, and she runs away, and she's gone. And that's where the play came from. And I'll take her face to my grave. I've never seen anything quite like it. And so the play was important to me to write, and I never thought it was going to be turned into a musical. And I did it up in Massachusetts, and then I insisted that the same actors come down to New York, and then they replaced one. I used the guys from Boston, and Clive Barnes gave it a really good review. It didn't do well. It was like it wasn't a play anybody wanted, I don't think.
Mm-hmm.
But it gets done in Europe a lot. I mean, a lot. There are probably 3 productions running in France right now. In some form, in amateur theater or small professional theaters. They're good acting roles, I guess. I don't know.
My Old Lady play.
Oh God, that's some years later, isn't it? I wanted to write a kind of love letter to France. I mean, I've probably had 50 of my plays translated and performed in French, and I've been decorated by the French government. I'm a commandeur in the Order of Arts and Letters. It's the highest you can get from the French government. So I wanted to write a kind of love letter to France, which is not like a really good idea for a play. It's not an idea for a play at all. And I thought it could be. I just want to back up to the primary English class to say that that was my foray into comedy, and I was shocked that people laughed. It really shocked me. Everything I've ever written is kind of funny in the beginning. I always involve the audience with laughter, but then once I got them, and I've got some other purpose. So that was the first time I wanted to create just an entertainment, because I had this ridiculous idea that I was going to write a Neil Simon play. So that I just want to bring that back later at some point, because it ties into Out of the Mouths of Babes, the newer play. Because I've probably only written 2, 3, 4 comedies in all the 75 plays or whatever I've written. Anyway, so I started out just thinking, well, what if I just bring an American to Paris? And I had this shock of bumping into a real estate system in France called the viager. Viager means literally for life, but It's a way to buy real estate. If an old person has a house or an apartment, and they want to die at home, but they really can't afford to stay there, they can sell their property at a reduced price, and at a greatly reduced price. They can take a 200,000 euro apartment and sell it for 100,000. But the buyer, or 50,000, but the buyer has to pay what they call a small bouquet, give them a bunch of money, and then pay a monthly charge. And they don't get the property until the old person dies. So in essence, you're betting that the person, you want that property, but you're betting that that old person is in trouble and is going to go fast. And so I just thought it was shocking, that civilized people would do that so openly. And agencies, real estate agencies, existed just to sell viager properties. So I started with that. An American inherits an apartment in Paris. He gets there. He finds an old lady. He inherits it from his father. He finds an old lady living in it, and he realizes it's a viager, and he doesn't get it till she dies. And he's indigent. He lives with her and her daughter, and discovers that this woman, this old lady, and his father were lovers over a period of 50 years, and she's the reason his mother committed suicide. So I start out with a very light idea, and I end up with this heavy Horovitz, this will kill you kind of play. And it seemed to work very well. That's the play. That plays in the repertory of Moscow Art Theater. I went to Moscow to see the play, and the younger actors who play the Kevin Kline role and the Kristen Scott Thomas role are quite good. But the old lady must have been a huge star in Russia for years and years and years, but I missed her whole career. And I'm looking at her, she looks remarkably like Elvis Presley at the end of his life. And she changes her costume every 5 minutes. She finds a reason, she goes off stage. And so I'm sitting there, and I don't speak Russian. I know 10 words of Russian, and my wife is sound asleep beside me. And I'm looking at it, and I'm thinking, why did I write this play? What? And I remember that I want to, I have this love affair with Paris that I want to, and then I'm thinking, but we don't see Paris. They're just 3 actors in a room on stage. And I start to imagine Matthias, the characters out on the street in Paris, and my Paris, with opera. I've been running in Paris mornings for 50 years, and what I've seen, I've seen opera singers singing into the river, and practicing, and so I start to imagine the movie. And when the play was over, I had to go up on stage and get flowers with the old lady and tell her how good she was. And I come back and I say to Jill, I'm going to do a movie based on my old lady. I'm going to do that. Because I knew I was going to turn 75, and I wanted to do something that would really scare the shit out of me. Because I've done so many plays. It's not that it's not exciting when a new play opens. It is. I love it. But it's not what it was when my first play opened or my second play opened. It doesn't scare me in the same way. Yeah. And I'm now the voice of reason. I'm no longer the guy who would kill the critic who gave a bad review. I'm the one who tells everybody to calm down, enjoy this experience. This is a play that opens as a miracle. Just enjoy the miracle. And anyway, I went to Rachel and I said, "What do you think?" And she said, "I'd love to do that." And I got Gary Foster as an old friend of mine, a movie producer, and I got him involved. But this, I let it. I think in this life, if you want to do something, you'll know this because you do it. You want to do something that's really hard that you possibly can't do. You simply announce that you're going to do it. "Hi, I'm Jimmy Carter. I'm running for president." You just do that. So I just let it be known that I was going to direct a movie of My Old Lady and see what happens. So I get a call from a big deal agent producer in Paris saying, will you have lunch with Isabelle Adjani? And I should tell you that the play of My Old Lady did well in New York, but in Paris it ran for 2 years in a big, big Broadway-sized theater, and it was a wonderful, wonderful success. So they know the play in French. And so this guy calls me and says, will you have lunch with Isabelle Adjani? So at that point, I knew that I didn't want to make a French language movie. I just thought, I'm going to be 75. I don't want to make a movie that nobody sees. I really, if I don't get really great actors who are stars who are going to bring an audience in, I really don't want to spend 2 years of my life doing this thing. I knew that. So I thought about Maggie Smith, and I thought I should really get a great English actress like Maggie Smith to play the old lady. So the guy says, have lunch with Isabelle Adjani. And I say to him, you know, I don't really see it that way. I don't see it. And he said, well, just have lunch with her. And I think, schmuck, why wouldn't you have lunch with Isabelle Adjani? You crazy? So I go to this lunch, and I always have meetings in Paris on the first floor at Café de Flore. It's always quiet. Everybody's on the ground floor trying to be seen by everybody else. So it's empty up. So I'm up there with them, and he introduces me, and like 2 minutes into it, she says, who is your dream casting for Matthias, for the guy? So I hadn't said this to anybody, not my daughter, really not even myself, and I hear myself say Kevin Kline. The moment I say Kevin Kline appears at the top of the stairs. So I think, you know, they're pulling a joke on me. And then I think, well, how did they know that I wasn't going to say Barack Obama? You know? So Kevin sees me and he waves, and I wave him over, and he said, what are you doing here? And I said, I'm going to direct a movie of My Old Lady, and I'd love you to play the lead. So he says, I mean, Kevin Kline was known as Kevin Decline. He just doesn't say yes. So he said, well, send me the script. And I think, oh, he's just being polite, you know. And anyway, he tells me months later when he's thinking he'll never send me the script. He's just being polite. And I sent him the script, and he liked it, and we worked on it together. He came to the house, and we'd do readings like with Marion Seldes. We had wonderful people come to my house, and we'd do readings as it developed. It's very hard to make a movie out of a play. Especially if you're the playwright, because you remember every line that worked or every speech that worked with the audience, and that's not what movies are like. So it took a long time and a lot of drafts. And then at some point, Rachel said to me, have you told Kevin that you're going to direct it? And I thought, Jesus, I don't know if I ever actually told him that. So I met up with him and I said, Kevin, I'm going to direct the movie. And is that okay? And he said, you know, I always wondered why it took you so long to do that. You know, why you didn't do that years ago. He was great. He was very, very supportive. He didn't mean it for a minute. He just, you know, said the good thing. He's a great actor to work with. Maggie Smith is very English, so she arrives letter perfect, and she's got it. You know, and so if you want to change a line, you got a problem because she's Kevin is like a child, but what I could do with Kevin was to tell him exactly what I wanted. You know, just do the wrong thing, give him exactly the result. I want to get there. And then he would give me that, and then he'd show me 6 other things. He'd show me the same thing funny, the same thing sad, the same thing. And so in the cutting room, if it was getting too heavy, I had a lighter take. But the thing is that he would, in a sense, improvise. And Maggie was driving her crazy. I mean, she would, once a day, she would say, what the fuck is he doing? And So I had a scene where I needed her to really treat him like he was from another planet. That she's stuck with him because he's the son of the ex-lover who sent him there, and yet she hates him and everything he represents. He's so unlike his father, and she was doing it, and it was very polite, and it wasn't working. So I said to Kevin, I said, just show me something really different. And then I went to Maggie and I said, just no matter what he does, all right, don't stop us. Just let's go with it. And so Kevin does this stupid improv, and she's looking at him, and all you can hear in their internal monologue is, what the fuck is he doing? And she can't say anything except the lines, and it's just beautiful scene in the movie. And it has nothing to do with doing plays, because you're in a room for 4 weeks and you talk everything out, and you get there logically, and it was remarkable for me to do the movie. I loved it. I loved doing something. It did scare me, and I loved doing something that was really new.
And the movie's doing well, or
the movie did very well. I mean, it made money, if that's a sense of it. But it was shown all over the world, and it won prizes, and I thought it did well. I thought it was good. I think that's more important than, and it had an audience, and it harkens back to, I just didn't want to spend all that time making a movie that nobody would see,
And you have a play in New York right now, at the Cherry Lane.
I have a play.
Is this your first show at the Cherry Lane Theater?
I've done tons of plays in the studio. I've developed plays in the little studio space there. I've done stuff on the big stage.
Part of the Mentors Project?
Never. No, always just, can I grab a couple of weeks there and do something? And Angelina is very generous that way. And we did, I have a piece I did. My mother, I have 5 kids. The mother, actually I should get this in here. You remember I told you I got married when I was 17 years old, and the girl was pregnant again, and I said, I'll give you money?
Yeah.
I wrote a movie with Ray Fiennes called Sunshine some years ago. And I was making money, actually, going to community centers that would, it's a movie that tracks a Jewish family through the 20th century. Ray Fiennes plays himself as his father, his grandfather, his great-grandfather in the movie. And István Szabó directed it, the Hungarian director. So mostly Jewish community centers were playing this movie, and I would get paid to go and do a Q&A. They would screen it, I'd show up to a Q&A. And it was going on for a period of a year like that, and I could live on it. It was fine. But I started to become very callous, because these Q&As, there's always a line of women afterwards who line up and don't ask questions during the Q&A, and then they have something that really want to tell you about themselves and their family. And so I'm like doing lip service. I wasn't very nice, and this woman's in the line. She asked me a question, and I'm doing some pretentious, bullshitty answer, and I realize she's crying. And I stop and I go, "What is it?" And she said, "You don't know who I am, do you?" And she was the second baby. She doesn't look anything like me or any of my kids, but she looks exactly like her mother. She's in her 50s now. And Ben. And so I started a relationship with her, but I'm always like, I don't think she's my kid. She doesn't seem like my kid. She doesn't act like my kid. She doesn't look like my kid. So she comes to New York, sees plays of mine with her husband. She comes to our place in Gloucester. She lives up in Massachusetts with her children. She has 2 daughters. And at some point I say, I think we have to do some kind of DNA test or blood test or something. And if you're I don't really know for sure. And because she was adopted when she was the woman I was married, the girl I was married to, remarried, and immediately after she was born, and she was adopted by her father who raised her, and I said, if you're my daughter, I'll embrace you as my daughter. If you're not my daughter, you'll be my friend. She went ballistic, and she was very upset. So I thought, okay, well, she knows she's not my daughter. I don't know what this is all about, but good. So last summer, she got in contact with me, and she said, let's do the test. So we buy a kit at CVS and meet at a Dunkin' Donuts in Peabody, Massachusetts, do the swab test, send it off, comes back 99.98% positive. So now I have a lady, and then we look at each other and say, now what? You're 55, but we're going to change her diapers? What do we do? It's just ridiculous. But she has something that she wants, and she has one of her daughters is an art student, is a painter at BU, and wants to know, how do I get out of Marblehead, Massachusetts? How do I have a life as an artist? And she said, will you talk to my dad? Sure. So I have a really nice relationship with this biological granddaughter, who's lovely.
Huh.
So that kind of puts it into that story. My Rachel, Matthew, and Adam's mom, Doris, was a painter and sculptor, and she died when she was in her early 40s. And she had the curse of the Irish. Her grandfather died from drink, her father died from drink, and she drank for 9 months and died. I mean, it's like an allergy. She took a drink and became an alcoholic and had cirrhosis of the liver and died. I've never had drinkers in my family or in my particular life, and so I didn't know what was going on. Anyway, I remarried. Running was very important in my life, and I was quite good at it. I did 50 marathons, and I married a woman we've been married for 35 years, called Jillian Adams, and she was English national marathon champion and record holder. We met at a race, and we have 30-year-old twins, Hannah and Oliver. Oliver's a best-selling author. He's a golf person. He took up golf as a 10-year-old, and I had to start playing golf because they wouldn't let him on a golf course without an adult. And he became like he's really got his mother's champion, I got a win in him. And he was junior champion up there, and then he got down to a 1.8 handicap. And he went to Harvard, but he did a gap year at University of St. Andrews in Scotland, and he started caddying. And then he wrote a very successful book called An American Caddy in St. Andrews that did like 6 printings and hardcover, and it's done all over the world in paperback. In fact, he's did a reading tonight in St. Andrews, and he goes back every year and he does that. And his sister works for a nonprofit in Oakland, and she's the only one of the 5 kids I raised who doesn't live in the village. And I should say this, my daughter Rachel has 10-year-old twins. A couple of months after her twins were born, Matthew, my oldest son, his wife had twins. So we've got 4 10-year-old grandchildren who go to the school on the corner of our street, to PS 41, where my 5 kids went to school. And the 4 10-year-olds play on the same Little League team that my son Matthew coaches. Wow. So we're a very close family, and it's it's kind of the father of choice and the father of chance. I think you become the father that you didn't have, maybe. I don't know. But I think my grandfather did that, certainly. With his kids, he was a fantastic father to his 6 kids. By contrast, the legend of my paternal grandfather was that he beat his kids with a strap and made them kiss the strap. they misbehaved. Isn't it interesting that the 8 kids in my father's family all became enormously successful people, very driven people, and the 6 kids in my mother's loving family were kind of ne'er-do-wells who just had nice families. So that's my blood test anyway.
Do you spend most of your time in New York now, or you're split it still between Gloucester, France?
I mean, I'm based here, I guess. I'm really like a wandering Jew. I spend so little. The last 4 years have been particularly difficult because we live across from St. Vincent's Hospital. It mysteriously bankrupted, and in its place is rising 350 luxury apartments with studios that started at $4.5 million. And I'd be working at my desk and there'd be this tremendous bang and everything on my desk would go up in the air. And it was really impossible to live in the house. So that inspired us to get the hell out of there during the last 4 years. But I've spent enormous amounts of time in France. Gloucester has really become a warm weather place.
Mm-hmm.
I was unpaid artistic director of Gloucester Stage Company for 28 years. And when the theater was really at a point where it seemed like it didn't need me to do that it could really afford to pay somebody, and I knew it was time to step back. And I do plays. I can introduce plays there. I do plays there every couple of years, and they do well for the theater, and that's important to me that the theater continue. But it's doing very well. It's 36 years old. It's got ostensibly 200 seats, and and in this country, as you know, if you're not in a major city and you're not attached to a university, it's a miracle for a theater to go on for 36 years. It's just a miracle. Yeah. And so I'm proud of that.
Where do you see the whole thing going now? Off-Broadway, new plays, new play development? You've come at it from many different angles, not just a writer, but also as a producer and theater founder and internationally.
Well, the whole thing going. I mean, at this point in my life, you ask me where I live, and I hesitate. And when I say I love to travel, I don't know if it represents how much I love to travel. To me, I don't stay in hotels. I try to get people to put me in their homes because I love to see how people live in China and what they eat and all of that. It fascinates me more than anything else, really. I just love it. So I'm here because I have children and grandchildren who are here, unless they travel with me, and then that's great. So I'm always coming back here. That's the magnet. I think if I didn't have the children and grandchildren here, maybe I wouldn't be here. Maybe I wouldn't. I mean, my daughter Rachel, on my birthday this year, thanked me for not moving to Paris. She said, "I know it was something you wanted to do and didn't do because of us, and thank you for that." Yeah. Meaning, just go there and live there and be there. Go to the south of France instead of Gloucester. But theater is theater. I mean, you at my age, you walk down the street, everybody's younger, and the young actors keep coming to New York, and I can't imagine that they're going to stop coming to New York. And so it just changes form. What was off-Broadway doesn't really exist now. But when I got to New York, the old people, I used to sit at Harold Clurman's feet. He used to go to the Russian tea room and hold court every night, and I would sit and just shut up and listen while he talked. And he would talk about the group theater and about, playwrights that would write a play every year for Broadway. That was what they did. That's what a playwright did. And even in the 1960s, when I was a young playwright, come to New York, it didn't make sense what they were talking about. Nobody wrote a play a year ago. Neil Simon wrote a play. There was one. And there was a period of time in this country of 200-300 million, and whatever it was at that time, when there were maybe 10, 12 playwrights who could live from their playwriting. I mean, we didn't talk about that, but that was the reality of it. And so, in an odd way, that's changed. There are more playwrights who can actually feed their families, make a living, writing plays probably than ever before. And I think the internet has changed everything, that the word gets out. If a play is good, somehow people know about it all over the place. So a play gets done internationally much quicker than it used to get done. I mean, my play's running at Cherry Lane Theater, and there are already 7 or 8 translations that are being done. I didn't ask for that. It's just they asked for the play. I send it off on the computer. Can I do it? Yeah, sure, great. And so I don't know what form it will take, whether it will be, I mean, there's always going to be some way that you can work and not make a penny, get a subway token for day one and a subway token end day, and there'll be somebody who's just making gross national product as a salary. But that I think it was always like that, really, some form or another. I think theater is organic. I mean, it's what people do. It's not that mysterious. People were acting out stories in caves, and they'll be acting out stories on the moon. It's a way for us to understand life, to slow it down. Life goes by so quickly that it takes art to compress it and to slow it down and to try to make sense of it. And I mean, I think there's only one question out there that everybody has, and that's, why are we alive? Why are we on the earth? And people go to their jobs and they go to their offices, and we just look at life and write about it. When I was a kid, it was like, me, look at me, look at me. And at a certain point in my life, I knew if I wrote a play, it was going to get done. And I started to think about, what does an audience need? I'm taking up their time, I'm dicking around with their babysitter money, and I better have something to say. And you start to realize that what interests an audience may not be in the best public interest, And you start to think about what they need, not what they want. And I think if you give an audience what they need, they respond. Nobody buys a ticket to a play at primary stages because they want to find out why they're alive. Nobody turns to his wife and says, let's get 2 tickets to a Horovitz play to find out why we're on Earth. But I think that's under everything. Every painting we look at, every play we see, we've got this question of, why are we here? What are we supposed to do with our time? And I think art exists for that. So what's the future of theater? Well, what's the future of life? When there's no life on Earth, there'll be no theater, I guess.
Great. Arthur Miller.
We did I was 28 years old, and I don't know how old he was, but I was asked by public television to do a conversation with Arthur Miller. I think it was to be 2 hours. And it was just the 2 of us on camera, just talk about theater and being a playwright in America. And so we talked and talked and talked and talked and talked. And I was wearing tight bell-bottom jeans. I probably weighed 130 pounds. I had love beads, and I had hair down to here. He's in a tweed sport coat with it. Very, not rabbinical, but certainly professorial. And I'm saying things like, well, Arthur, we're both playwrights. And he's just smiling like this. I've seen all of this. He's probably thinking to himself, I was that kid once, and just putting up with it. He was lovely. And after an hour and a half, we hear the voice of God saying, we don't have any sound on the tape at all. Something's gone terribly wrong. And can you guys go away and we'll fix it and come back? And so we go into a green room and we chat for a while. We come back and everything we said in an hour and a half, we then say in 5 minutes, and we're just looking at each other, talking. The thing, I guess it ended up being an hour. And years later, maybe 5 years ago, 6 years ago, I see on the internet that the tape from that show is being sold. So one of my kids sees it or something, but I know about it. So I do the contact and I say, I'm the guy on the tape. Can you send me a tape? I'd love to see it. I have to buy it, so I buy the tape and they send it to me. I watch 5 minutes of it and I realize that my legs are perspiring. I am the most pretentious little twit I've ever seen in my life. And I can't watch it. I just turn it off. So my son Matthew comes over and he sees the tape. He said, and I say, no, take it. You don't let me take it. And it turns out my kids are like, they get together without me and they're watching it and laughing. It's like a big night for them. Miller was, I thought he was lovely. I mean, Park You Car in Harvard Yard was produced by Robert Whitehead on Broadway. And Whitehead produced most of Arthur Miller's plays, if not all of his plays. So he talked about Miller a lot. They were really close. And I got to know Miller after the conversation that we did together. I remember he was living in Roxbury, Connecticut, a big old house. Whitehead told me he never threw anything away, that he had his old cars, he had his old clothing, he never, I guess he grew up poor in Brooklyn. I know the problem. And so he just couldn't, not see value. And so it stayed in his life. So he had this big old house with a barn and it was all full of crap that he couldn't throw away. And I was on some panel with him, and he was in terrible spirit. I said, what's the matter? And he said, we had a fire, and he said, I lost my house, I lost everything I own. He said, it's the worst thing that ever happened to me. I'm nothing of it, a whole lifetime. And he was really holding back tears when he was talking about it. 6 months later, I see him, and he says to me, that was the best thing that ever happened to me. Do you ever see the little Japanese book about how to throw things away? It's like he read the book. It was amazing.
It's just freedom.
But during the reign of Frank Rich, the reign of terror of Frank Rich in New York theater, Arthur Miller couldn't get produced in New York. Edward Albee couldn't get produced in New York. I couldn't get produced in New York, really. I mean, not in any significant way. And I went to Paris. Albee went to Texas, of all places, and he took a job teaching at the University of Texas, and they did all his... And Miller went to London and really became, I think he became Arthur Miller at that time, because once the plays were on in London, then it went all through Europe. And so in a strange way, Frank Rich did a huge favor to Miller's career. And look at the way it comes back now. It's wonderful. It comes back to us from Europe. It's interesting, isn't it?
Great.